Tonight, we bring you a story not just of defeat, but of unraveling, a tale of how the ambitions of a superpower can be undone not only by its enemies, but by the merciless hand of winter and the limits of its own logistics. On the vast, snow-covered plains of eastern Ukraine, Russia's grand offensive has come to a standstill, frozen in every sense of the word. What was meant to be a swift and overwhelming advance has instead become a chilling tableau of stalled machinery and shattered morale. Tanks, once the pride of the Russian military and symbols of unstoppable power, now sit motionless. Steel coffins half buried in mud and ice, their engines silent, their crews long gone or huddled nearby for warmth. The front lines are paralyzed, not just by the relentless resistance of Ukrainian defenders, but by a devastating lack of fuel and supplies. The mighty war machine designed to roll across continents has been brought to a halt by empty fuel tanks and broken supply chains. The Russian war machine, built on a foundation of oil and diesel, is now starving. Fuel trucks, themselves stranded and empty, litter the landscape. Soldiers scavenge for whatever they can find. But the lifeblood of the offensive has run dry. Soldiers, ill-prepared for the brutal cold, are freezing in their makeshift camps. They are caught in a logistical nightmare that has turned what was supposed to be a modern, high-tech battlefield into a frozen graveyard of men and machines. The scenes from the front lines are hauntingly reminiscent of history, grainy black and white images of tanks frozen in place, echoing the disastrous winter campaigns of the past. It's a stark reminder that even in the 21st century, nature remains a formidable adversary. Desperate and cold, Russian soldiers are forced to push or pull their dead vehicles through the deep snow, their faces etched with exhaustion and defeat. The once proud columns have become lines of men struggling just to survive another night. The offensive, once announced with confidence and bravado, has dissolved into chaos and retreat. Equipment is abandoned in the snow, left behind in the rush to escape the encroaching cold and the relentless Ukrainian counterattacks. The air, once filled with the roar of engines and the thunder of artillery, is now marked by a desperate, haunting silence. The only sounds are the wind and the distant echoes of a campaign gone terribly wrong. This is how the might of a superpower is brought to its knees, not by a single, decisive battle, but by the slow, grinding death of its supply lines. The vast columns that once inspired fear now lie broken and scattered, testaments to the power of logistics and the unforgiving nature of winter. In Moscow, planners and generals pore over maps, searching for answers, but they overlooked a critical detail: how to keep this massive force supplied, fed, and fueled across hundreds of miles of hostile, frozen terrain. Now, the price for that oversight is being paid in full on the frozen battlefields of Ukraine. Each destroyed vehicle, each abandoned tank, is a monument to the cost of hubris and the failure to respect the challenges of war. The world is watching as Russia's plans unravel in the most dramatic way possible. Headlines flash across screens, leaders gather in urgent meetings, and the consequences of this collapse ripple far beyond the snow-covered fields. The story of this failed offensive is not just a military setback. It is a critical chapter in a long and brutal war, a lesson in the limits of power, and a stark warning to those who would underestimate the combined forces of resistance, winter, and the unyielding demands of war. Every year, Russia showcases its military might in grand parades through the heart of Moscow. Tanks, missiles, and columns of soldiers march across Red Square, projecting an image of unstoppable, high-tech power to the world. The spectacle is meant to inspire awe, a reminder of Russia's ambition to be seen as a dominant force on the global stage. But on the front lines in Ukraine, the reality could not be more different. Here, the war has taken on a medieval character, with scenes that seem ripped from another century. The contrast between the polished parades and the muddy, battered battlefields is striking. As Ukrainian forces launched relentless attacks, Russia's modern logistics network began to unravel. Supply lines that once relied on advanced vehicles and technology were suddenly cut off, forcing Russian troops to improvise with whatever they could find. Military trucks, once the backbone of supply operations, now sit idle and abandoned. In their place, old vans, battered farm tractors, and even horse and mule-drawn carts have become essential for moving supplies. The Russian army, once proud of its mechanized might, is now forced to rely on methods that seem almost ancient. Ukraine knew it couldn't match Russia tank for tank, or missile for missile. Instead, it focused on a different strategy, targeting the weak point: the supply lines. Artillery and ambushes turned Russian convoys into smoldering wrecks, cutting off the flow of ammunition, food, and fuel. Drones buzz overhead, guiding precision strikes and sabotage missions. Ukrainian teams slip behind enemy lines to destroy bridges and railways, while missiles rain down on convoys. The Russian army, bled dry by these attacks, is forced to turn to ever more desperate and primitive methods to keep its war machine running. Elite Russian units, trained for high-tech warfare, now find themselves waiting in muddy trenches for supplies that may never arrive. The trucks are gone, replaced by rickety vans and horse-drawn carts that struggle through the mud, braving enemy fire and treacherous roads. These makeshift convoys are easy targets for Ukrainian drones and artillery. Each attack deepens the shortages, leaving Russian soldiers hungry, low on ammunition, and increasingly demoralized. The contrast is stark and almost surreal. An army that dreams of global power, now struggling to move basic supplies just a few dozen kilometers. Soldiers are sometimes forced to carry heavy loads by hand, trudging through mud and snow, as their high-tech vehicles lie abandoned. The sight of horse-drawn carts and exhausted animals on a modern battlefield is more than just a logistical problem, it's a symbol of Russia's strategic failure. The image of soldiers guiding horses past the wrecks of once mighty tanks tells the story of a military forced backwards in time. Even the most powerful army can be brought to its knees if it cannot solve the basic problem of logistics. Abandoned equipment and exhausted troops are a testament to the limits of brute force when supply lines are severed. Ukraine's smart, adaptive resistance has forced Russia to abandon its modern ambitions and return to methods from a bygone era. In this war, ingenuity and resilience have proven more powerful than parades and propaganda. Russia's military has always relied on its railways, the steel spine of its logistics. But this strength became a fatal weakness. Ukraine exploited it with devastating precision. First, they struck oil refineries deep inside Russia with drones, halting fuel production. Next, they hit storage depots near the border, causing chaos in supply chains. Finally, they sabotaged the railways themselves, blowing up bridges, derailing trains. Each destroyed bridge or derailed train created bottlenecks, paralyzing supply movement. Supplies slowed to a trickle, then stopped. The Russian army was forced to offload supplies far from the front, creating logistical chaos. Trucks had to cover the final, most dangerous leg. But there weren't enough and roads were vulnerable. The breaking of the railway spine shattered Russia's logistics. The stage was set for disaster on the front lines. Ukraine turned Russia's greatest strength into its greatest vulnerability. Ukraine's attacks on Russia's supply chain were relentless and creative, striking at the very heart of the Russian war machine. Every day, new tactics emerged, keeping Russian commanders guessing and their supply officers on edge. The battlefield was no longer just a clash of armies, but a chessboard of logistics, where every move could mean the difference between victory and disaster. Drones became the nightmare of Russian logistics. Cheap, effective, and deadly. These small, nimble machines could appear out of nowhere, flying low and fast, evading detection until it was too late. They hovered above convoys, scanning for the most valuable targets, and then struck with terrifying precision. Fleets of drones hunted fuel trucks and convoys, striking with pinpoint accuracy. Each successful hit sent shockwaves through the Russian ranks, as the loss of a single tanker could halt an entire offensive. The psychological impact was immense. Drivers dreaded every journey, knowing that death could rain from the sky at any moment. A single drone could destroy a multi-million-dollar tanker, making every supply run a gamble. The cost was not just in equipment but in morale. Russian soldiers watched helplessly as their lifeline went up in flames, the smoke visible for miles. Sabotage played a key role. Partisans cut fuel lines, contaminated stores, and ambushed convoys. These acts of resistance multiplied the chaos, forcing Russia to divert troops to guard supply routes, stretching their forces even thinner. The cumulative effect was chaos. Main roads became roads of death, littered with burned-out trucks and shattered vehicles. What were once vital arteries of war turned into graveyards of twisted metal, a stark warning to any who dared to travel them. To avoid attacks, convoys used muddy back roads, where vehicles got stuck and became easy targets. The Russian army found itself bogged down, literally and figuratively, as trucks sank into the mud and became sitting ducks for Ukrainian strikes. Desperate, Russia used any vehicle available. Even civilian cars and farm equipment, tractors, vans, and even bicycles were pressed into service, a sign of just how dire the situation had become. The once mighty Russian supply chain was now a patchwork of improvisation and desperation. In the most telling sign of failure, they turned to horses and mules to carry supplies. It was a return to methods not seen in modern warfare for generations, a clear admission that technology and machinery had failed them. A 21st century army, reduced to animal power, is the ultimate symbol of collapse. The image of soldiers leading animals through the mud, burdened with ammunition and fuel, spoke volumes about the state of the Russian advance. Ukraine dismantled Russia's logistics piece by painful piece. Each destroyed truck, each sabotaged pipeline, was another thread pulled from the fabric of the Russian war effort, unraveling their plans day by day. The supply chain was crippled, and the front lines paid the price. Russian troops waited in vain for fuel and ammunition, their fighting spirit sapped by hunger, exhaustion, and the constant fear of running out. Modern warfare was lost not with bullets but with fuel. In the end, it was the empty tanks and silent engines that marked the true defeat, as the Russian advance ground to a halt, stranded and powerless on the battlefield. For Russian soldiers, the collapse of the supply chain became a nightmare. The winter was brutally cold. Without fuel, engines and heat went silent. Soldiers were trapped in freezing metal boxes, ordered to conserve every last drop. Tanks became immobile targets, the offensive dead on arrival. Lacking fuel, they couldn't build proper defenses. Exposed, immobile, and freezing. Morale plummeted as soldiers realized they'd been abandoned. Food, water, and medical supplies stopped arriving. Soldiers melted snow for water, medical care vanished, and wounded couldn't be evacuated. Frostbite and hypothermia became common killers. Desperation led to siphoning fuel, burning equipment for warmth, and abandoning hardware. The image of a soldier freezing beside a dead tank is a tragic symbol of collapse. This is a soldier's nightmare, brought to life on the frozen fields of Ukraine. The front lines became a graveyard of hope. As if Ukrainian attacks weren't enough, Russia faced another enemy: corruption. Fuel was stolen at every level. Officers and soldiers siphoned it off to sell on the black market. Even the limited fuel that survived attacks rarely reached the front. Chechen units seized shipments for themselves, leaving others stranded. Commanders couldn't trust supply reports. Attacks were ordered, but tanks couldn't move. The theft of fuel was sabotage from within, destroying trust and morale. Soldiers saw their leaders getting rich while they froze. Corruption proved as destructive as the enemy, accelerating collapse. The fuel crisis rippled across Russia's entire military. Air defense systems like the S-400 rely on diesel generators for power. As fuel ran out, commanders rationed it. Radars operated only a few hours a day. This created dangerous gaps in air defense. Ukraine exploited these blind spots, timing attacks for when radars were down. The crisis spread to civilians. The military seized fuel from the market, causing shortages and rationing. Gas stations ran dry, prices soared, and public services suffered. Heating oil vanished as winter set in. Farmers couldn't harvest crops. The war's logistical failure became a societal crisis. The costs spread from the front lines to the heart of Russia. The Kremlin could no longer hide the true price of war. The ripple effect was devastating. Nothing destroys an army's will faster than the sense of abandonment. Russian soldiers, cold and hungry, saw only failure and incompetence. Morale shattered. The fighting spirit evaporated in the Ukrainian winter. The Kremlin's plan of overwhelming force was exposed as fantasy. Russia's military, powerful on paper, was crippled by logistics, corruption, and poor leadership. The psychological blow was immense. Images of defeat and stories of freezing soldiers humiliated the nation. Commanders feared new attacks. Soldiers refused orders. The military apparatus was paralyzed by despair. The strategy was in ruins. The chain of command broken. This is how armies break, not in a single battle, but through the slow erosion of hope. The collapse was total. We have witnessed a turning point. Russia's failed offensive is more than a setback. It's the collapse of a system. The sight of horse-drawn carts is a metaphor for imperial ambitions outstripping reality. Russia's ability to wage large-scale war is shattered. Trust and credibility are gone. The war enters a new phase. Russia forced onto the defensive, its dreams frozen in the mud. The shockwaves reach Moscow, cracking the facade of strength built by Putin. The failure in Ukraine is now a domestic crisis, threatening the regime's stability. The frozen tanks and demoralized soldiers are a warning. The question is not if Russia's war effort will fail, but how that failure will reshape Russia and the world. This story is far from over. The final chapter is yet to be written.